Left in Kentucky, the podcast of Indivisible Northern Kentucky, District 4. And welcome to our latest episode of Left in Kentucky. And you are here with yours truly, Roberto Henriquez.
Hi, I'm Amy Ferguson.
Hello, Ann Dickerson here.
And we've got a lot going on this week, so let's jump right into it. Our Cow Patty Awards. This being our third episode, this is a long-standing tradition and one that we're very proud of. So today, why don't we start off with Amy? What
Hello.
do you have for us?
I chose Mr. Wayne Lewis, Charter School Champion and Kentucky Commissioner of Education. Congratulations, Wayne. You win the cow patty from me this week for requesting the list of teachers that called in to Frankfort. Just what do you think you're going to be doing with those names, Mr. Lewis? We all want to know what your plan is.
Yep. Excellent. It's their sick days. They can use them how they want. Correct. That was an excellent one. Do you want me to go next, Ann, or do you want to go next?
Up to you.
I'll go next. Since Ann has a big surprise for us on her announcement, so we'll save that. So my cow patty goes to Mike Pompeo with the State Department for a number of reasons, but most notably was his decision to have a press briefing about world religious freedom and only inviting faith-based media to the press briefing and refusing to release any documentation or transcript of what happens at this meeting. Pretty sure that that's a violation of the law. I think they have to be open, but I'm sure we'll hear more about that. So Mike Pompeo gets my Cow Patty Award.
That's a stinky patty.
You went federal on us. Ooh,
yep.
Ah. Well, I'm going to take us back to the state level. I actually have 2 Cow Patty Awards. They were so significant that I just couldn't choose between the 2 of them. And I have a shocking word of praise. My first Cow Patty Award, obviously, goes to Damon Thayer. I wonder if we're ever going to have a week where he's not included in our Cow Patty Awards. For his first temper tantrum over Senate Bill 34, which was the basically anti-Grimes bill that couldn't make it out of Senate committee. So what did he do? He turned around and added it as an amendment to House Bill 114, and it passed, which is absolutely the most pathetic thing ever.
It stinks.
Yes, it does. The second one is going to go out to all of the House GOP members who voted on the last day for the net metering bill without the amendment that was added to make it a better bill. The way that bill was pushed through at the end of the night, it was after 11 o'clock, was absolutely one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. They had agreements between parties, bipartisan agreements that the House would not pass this bill if it didn't include the amendment, and the GOP members turned around and basically stabbed every one of the people on the other side in the back and decided, we don't need you, so we're going to take our supermajority and do what we want. And in the process, did a great deal of damage to the solar industry in a state that so desperately needs it. So that's a massive one. But that's
a whole field of patties.
That is a whole field of patties. But I do have to give a word of praise to Jeff Hoover.
Really?
Yes, I do.
Say more about this.
Do we ever agree on policy? Probably not. Did he do some really just down and dirty things last session?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. But I have to give credit where credit is due, especially when it's in such a public fashion. Because when it was his time to speak on the floor in regards to Damon Thayer's move with attaching his Senate Bill 34 as a whole to the House bill, he went off on the floor and was like, the House is not here to carry the Senate's water. and, just went on and on about what a dirty, shady deal it was, that he couldn't get it out of committee in the Senate. So they're going to turn around and pass it in the House. And I have to give props for that. I mean, he was at least willing to stand up and say that. And if there's one thing you can say about Jeff Hoover, it's that you'll never accuse him of carrying Matt Bevin's water like you can, Damon Thayer and the others.
Right.
He has been a big, outspoken Republican when it comes to that their job is not to serve the governor's pleasures. So I have to give him mad props for that. I'm always going to give props where props are due.
Excellent. If you have somebody that you think should be awarded a cow patty, feel free to leave that in the comments for the podcast. There is a way that you can go back where you download your podcast from and leave us comments, and we would love to see that.
Absolutely. Or you can also email us.
Yes.
inkyD4@gmail.com.
That address again.
inkyD4
at gmail.com.
Excellent.
No fair smiling and laughing at me when I'm talking.
And now we have with us Chris Tobe, who is the author of Kentucky Fried Pensions. He also served as trustee and investment committee member for the Kentucky Retirement Systems and is currently a candidate for state auditor. Welcome today, Chris.
Welcome, Chris.
All right, thank you.
So why don't you take a little bit to tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
I have, 30 years experience in the financial sector, mostly with banks and insurance companies, also doing consulting to public pensions around the country. But again, about 22 years ago, I was hired by Kentucky State Auditor Ed Hatchett to be part of his senior staff and to specifically look into pensions. I spent 3 years with him then and wrote a 40-page report on both pension systems back in the late 90s. And I've been kind of an expert on Kentucky pensions ever since, even though I went back out into the private sector. So I like to say I'm in my 22nd consecutive year of being told I've exaggerated the pension crisis.
Excellent. So speaking of the pension crisis, it's been pretty eventful the past two sessions in Frankfort. This week, we saw some really disturbing activity. Most notably, I think, when we start with Senate Bill 489, I believe it was.
Yeah, House Bill 49.
That's what it was.
And that is the one that is kind of snuck through by Jerry Miller, the guy who tried to sneak through the sewer bill. Probably snuck through something here that's much more damaging in a lot of ways, because the sewer bill can be fought in court. This one allows back a lot of these offshore hedge funds and private equity funds that we had been starting to get rid of under the old Senate Bill 2, but this reverses that and allows them back into our pensions.
Wow. Really, I think this is a general problem we're seeing, right, with the transparency and the lack of transparency. And instead of trying to say, okay, let's deal with this above board so that everybody knows what's going on, trying to do things behind the scenes and where people can't tell what exactly is happening.
Yeah, this bill is so much. The bill itself, House Bill 489, was passed in a few days on a consent calendar, snuck through, and then snuck through the Senate as well. And it was disguised and really lied about in the description of the bill and said it was improving accountability and transparency, when in fact it was making it much, much worse. The bill technically just strikes out the words of a standard, or I call the CFA Asset Manager Code of Conduct, which was a transparency standard for the money managers in the pensions that made them fully disclose their fees and their performance. And they took that standard out. Instead, they replaced it with a SEC standard, but it was a standard they were already subject to anyhow. So it was a bait and switch in a lot of ways, and they ended up, in dollars, being one of the most corrupt bills in Kentucky history. The reason why is because we're paying out over $400 million a year in these secret no-bid contracts to Wall Street from our two pension plans. And this allows the most expensive high-fee plans to still continue for them to use these type of plans.
I don't understand how we can have no-bid contracts. I mean, my understanding was always that when the government engages with something, they're supposed to take bids and then select based on those bids. How do we get around that?
Well, this started, I don't know, around maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and a lot with these kind of what we call private equity investments. A lot of people know private equity from Mitt Romney, or now Wilbur Ross, who is one of the Trump's aides, are private equity billionaires. And these private equity partnerships were kind of brought in series, and you were given a time to go in, and they have said that, you can't bid on these things because it's a great opportunity to get in. You're lucky to get in a lot of these really secret great investments. So if you have to ask for competitive bidding, then you can't get in these great investments. That's the argument that Madoff used in hedge funds. And they used that argument and threw a lot of money around in state legislators and were able to exempt themselves from competitive bidding laws all across the country.
I see. I understand. Okay. So what other bills have we seen in this session that are of concern?
Well, I mean, we had a bill that went in the opposite direction of House Bill 489, House Bill 126, that actually would have made it a Class D felony to go into these types of investments. But of course, that bill was never even allowed to be heard in committee.
Right.
And so, but it was out there for everyone to see. But then House Bill 489 was snuck in the last minute that went in the entire opposite direction.
Okay.
The other bill that was an investment related bill. House Bill 358 raised $1 billion from our KERS, the worst funded plan in the U.S. But this is really caused by Bevin's unfunded mandates to universities and some of these nonprofit mental health agencies. A lot of the pension crisis, Bevin claims to have fully funded the pension, but he really hasn't. He's played a lot of shifting games where he's shifted costs onto the budgets of county health departments, who many are now going bankrupt, universities. He has done a lot of the things that so-called appear to be fixing the pension are really money shifts. And the rating agencies, S&P and Moody's, who rate the company's credit, see through Bevin's games, and they've downgraded the state twice since he's come to office, and may downgrade him again if this House Bill 358 goes through. It's supposed to have another settlement between the Senate and House, and it may even be vetoed by the governor, not because he wants to not help just because he may be afraid of another rating downgrade while he's running for re-election.
Right. So I'm not sure that people really understand what is the impact of the rating downgrade. So how does that affect the state of Kentucky if our rating gets downgraded for a third time now?
If it gets rated, it just increases the cost of all borrowings. So when you issue bonds for highways or bridges, or even when school districts issue bonds to build new schools, the state rating affects all the underlying entities as well. And so the bond rating does have an effect on the cost of borrowing, and that could be in the hundreds or tens of millions of dollars. The other effect it has is on economic development. Other companies moving into Kentucky generally don't like to move into a state that has a bad credit rating. The only state with the worst credit rating in Kentucky is Illinois, and that has caused a lot of people, states like Indiana, use their superior credit rating to take businesses away from Illinois and Kentucky.
Got it. All right, so I guess what should we be doing in Kentucky to kind of get ourselves out of the situation we're in with the pensions?
Well, the main problem is we've been running a $1 billion deficit for the last 10 years. Billion with a B. So what they've done is they basically underfunded the pensions, used the pensions to borrow from them like a credit card. The first thing we have to come up with enough revenue to really balance our budget. The games that Governor Bevin have played is like, well, he makes people increase their pension payment, so then they have to cut payroll, and then then you have less people, less current employees supporting retirees. And it puts you in this circle that just keeps us going down the drain. So the real issue is going to be to get more revenue, so that when they make your pension payments, you're doing it in a healthy way, not when you're having to fire police and firemen and other people as you're doing it. So it really will take a revenue enhancements, which nobody wants or likes, to really solve it and to really pay the full arc. And then the second thing, which is the recommendation in my books, would be total transparency in investments and in benefits and everything else. And then the third is to separate the CERS, the city and county part of the pension, away from KRS, to bring more transparency and to give cities, counties, and school districts back control of their budgets. And that's an issue that's really relevant to a lot of cities and counties and school districts across the state. Governor Bevin has used the pension as a weapon to basically hurt them and destroy their budgets. These unfunded mandates for CERS, the part of the retirement system, it's not even a state liability; it's a city and county liability. But he has control of the KRS board and has used that to destroy budgets in cities, counties, and school districts.
Right. And, I think this is probably a good time also to kind of talk about, pensions and what the pension is. And as one of the things you mentioned was the governor talks about having people pay more into the pension. And as we look historically in the state, everybody, the people working in these systems, they've paid in what they're supposed to have paid in for their parts of the pensions, right?
Correct. And remember, people earn their pension every day like they earn their salary. You earn a little piece of it every day. It's not some extra. It's not something you just take away. The governor, a lot of misinformation from him on this. And even if our pension, the balance because of our mismanagement goes to zero, we still owe the pensioners the pension. The state does, or in the case of the CERS, the cities and counties do. So there's just a lot of spin and misinformation on what pensions are, what they do. They're part of your total compensation package, and many people, teachers, got into it with the fact that their total compensation may be 20% is pension, 80% salary, where in the private sector, your total compensation may be only 10% pension or 5% pension and 95% salary. So you can't change the game after you've already that's kind of the setting that you go into. And when you take away someone's pension, you're basically doing the same thing as cutting their salary. So most of this legislation, like taking teachers and putting them in a 401k, is really like giving a starting teacher a pay cut from $29,000 to $25,000. It's the same equivalent, and no one wants. And it really doesn't do anything to help the pension. So a lot of this is bait and switch. Almost all of the legislation that we've seen have been things that really don't help the pension liability. They just punish new teachers, or in the case of 2013, new firemen and policemen are punished because they do not get a good pension going forward as well. So it's basically the equivalent of a pay cut from maybe, I don't know what is, $30,000 to $25,000. So it's not surprising we have a harder time getting policemen and firemen today because we basically have cut their compensation.
Alrighty. So we're almost at the end of the legislation, this legislative session. There's, I think we're down to the 1 day for veto overrides, right after we're on the veto break now.
Yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I guess what should people be looking out for in this veto period and then the final day? Do we suspect any more surprise last-minute things coming from the legislature? Just what should we kind of be aware of in this last few days?
Chris, you're not sure. I don't know. You can't trust anything out of this legislature. So
they'll sneak it in.
One thing that I would expect, this possible thing, is that House Bill 358 the one that gives the universities, pulls them out of the KERS pension and also hurts the funding of the pension, the governor could veto that just because he doesn't want another bond downgrade.
Right.
Even though it's Republican legislation, he may end up vetoing that, seeing that because it could cause a bond downgrade. So that's one that is a possibility that's out there.
Alrighty, great. Well, we're just about the end of our time here. Is there, I guess if anybody's interested in more information about the Kentucky pensions or about you and what you're doing and you're involved with, is there someplace they can get more information?
Yeah, my website is christobe.com. And, of course, my Kentucky Fried Pensions you can look up on Amazon as well. And I'm hoping to be traveling the state, talking a lot about pensions to everybody, but, again, running for auditor as well. And on some other issues, we have the Yum Center, stadium over cost here, Fish and Wildlife. There are a lot of other areas the auditor will, I will look into if I'm elected as well. But the pensions will be the top priority. Because that's where the money is, that's where the corruption is.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate you taking time to be with us today, and we wish you much luck in your campaign as you go forward. And
thank you so much, Chris.
All right, thank you all for having me.
So now we've entered the veto period in the state legislature, where the governor has a chance to review everything that's been passed and decide if he's going to sign it or veto it. And we are going to do that ourselves by reviewing what's happened in this legislative session. So, Anne, did anything happen in this legislative session? Are there any bills to talk about?
Lord have mercy, help us all. I've taken to calling the Kentucky legislature the wham bam thank you ma'am legislature. And Republicans are just exceptional at it.
Yep.
I have no doubt that previously Democrats have taken advantage of this redonkulous system that we have. But now it's a master class. It's an art form. On the very last day of the legislature, prior to getting into the veto period, there were over 100 bills passing back and forth between the House and the Senate in one day.
That's insane. I can't think of an appropriate word to even talk.
Right. And so now, you have some legislators on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, with buyer's remorse, because all of a sudden they're realizing that they voted in favor of things that they never would have voted for had they read the bill. It's because they didn't have time to freaking read it.
That's why I was noticing, I think Attica Scott had said she had taken the position, if I don't have time to read it, it's a no vote.
Right. And that should be an automatic from anybody. I don't care I don't care if you're independent, Republican, Democrat, I don't care what you are. If you don't have time to read a bill, especially when you know the kind of shenanigans that goes down in the last 24, 48 hours, it should be an automatic no vote. If you can't read it, it's a no.
If it's a good bill, they should want to talk about it. They should want to debate it. They should be proud of it instead of hiding it in the dark.
Exactly.
So that's just telling me it's a bad bill.
Right. Or what was a good bill, and this happened a lot, what originally was a good bill or, what have you, all of a sudden had last minute crap attached to it.
Damon Thayer.
Snake in the grass.
That, just changed everything. So I'm going to run down this list here, and kudos goes out to Bruce Maples and Forward Kentucky, because they do an excellent job of helping the rest of us in the general population keep up with
such a great resource to everyone.
It is.
Check out Forward Kentucky.
And they help us to, stay on top of things. The other group that's exceptional, just really, I should say person, is Naomi Penner, who's with Together We Will Louisville, who, without her, I don't know that we'd know what's going on a daily basis. She's exceptional. And so
MVP.
Yeah, she's definitely an MVP. So we need to make sure that everybody's aware of those resources as well to follow those. You can find them on Facebook. Both have a public page to help you stay current on what's going on with the state legislators. So anyway, let's go down this list. Here's bills that have absolutely passed. Senate Bill 150 was the no permit, no training, concealed carry bill.
Yep.
That I think it's been signed into law. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the NRA guy came to Kentucky just to do a nice little photo op for Matt Bevin. And the big question on Twitter was, who paid who?
Yeah.
Did the NRA contribute to Matt Bevin's reelection campaign in order to get that bill passed? Or did Matt Bevin pay them so he would come in for a nice photo op for his reelection campaign?
The answer is yes. And we all pay.
The payments crossed in the mail, I think is what happened.
Little swinging on both sides there.
So now that goes into effect, I think, in July, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Then we have not one, not two, not three, but 4 bills against abortion. 4. Because that is so important.
Yep.
Right? We don't have anything else we need to be worrying about, like bringing in revenue to the state or, fixing
anything else,
fixing our infrastructure and what have you.
Yep.
We got to take the time to pass 4 bills on one thing.
Not to mention bills that have been ruled unconstitutional in other states where they've been passed.
Right. Every time.
So it's going to cost our state resources,
right?
People,
money,
right?
Our tax dollars,
right? The next bill that's just should be criminal. SB 7 is the forced arbitration bill, which allows employers to force employees to agree to arbitration of all claims, including sexual harassment, as a conduct of employment. I got to tell you right now, any employer who puts that on the table, they can't pay me enough money to go work for them.
Well, but here's the problem with that. All of the employers are going to put that are going to put those in their agreements. They're all going to put them in. Because I heard an argument on the radio the other day where somebody's saying, well, when you read your employment agreement, if the employer wants to do that, just don't sign it and don't work there. Go work someplace else. But what happens is almost every employer will put that in their paperwork. So it'll be a choice of, sure, don't work. You can be homeless.
Right. It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, you won't have a choice. You'll have to accept that if you want to have a job.
I don't know. I find it hard to believe that any ethical company would do this.
That's a whole nother podcast in and of itself.
Well, true. But that's what it comes down to. I mean, good companies treat their employees well. And the perfect example for that is Costco, right? They're not
good company.
Good company.
Great company.
Pays their people a living wage, just gave them another raise, has tiny turnover in employment because of how well they treat their employees. A company like that is not going to do this. They're going to feel so confident.
They don't need to do it.
That they don't need to do something like this.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Walmart and all of its subsidiaries will definitely do this. So, anyway, moving on, because we're going to run out of time before we get through the list. Let's see. SB 8 was the bill that passed that changed the teacher tribunal. That was one that all of the teachers were upset about. But if you put it in the grand scheme of things, of all of the bills that could affect our public schools and our public teachers that were on the table last year and this year, that have basically been stopped in their tracks.
Thank you, teachers.
Yes. This is probably one of the smallest things.
Right. This is one that changes the makeup of the tribunal.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And instead of... It removes a local parent, and replaces that parent with a labor lawyer. So the other thing that it does is it requires that the final decision is an up or down vote. There's no ability for the tribunal to recommend any kind of intermediate steps, like deal with mediation,
right,
or
they can't defer it to another process.
Correct.
It has to be a decision.
Correct. So, or there's no, well, if the teacher does X, Y, Z, then this. No, it's up or down. I don't know.
So not the worst of the worst.
It's not the worst of the worst, because in truth, I believe that this affects a limited number of teachers.
Right.
There's always going to be a good one that, that could get taken down this way.
Right.
But I think that the percentage is very small compared to other bills that would affect a much bigger majority. Senate Bill 250 went through. That was the bill that changed things specific to Jefferson County Public Schools that allows their superintendent to choose their principal. Mm-hmm. It also changed some of the things on their site-based decision-making council, I believe. But again, that affects one school district only.
Right.
The bill that was trying to add an amendment that would have had the same thing apply to all schools throughout Kentucky, that bill passed only on the condition that that amendment was removed. So that amendment has been removed. So we don't have to worry about that this time. Okay. Next, you have HB 114 that passed. That's the anti-Grimes bill. Started out as a simple, bill about elections. But what happened was, when Damon Thayer couldn't get SB 34 through, he basically took that bill in its entirety and attached it as an amendment to this bill. And what it does is it strips the Secretary of State of power. And it also changes the makeup of the Board of Elections. Here's the problem with that. First off, you have Republicans who aren't happy about this. This isn't just a partisan thing, because you don't know who the next Secretary of State is going to be. So let's play this out. Let's say that a Republican candidate wins this seat come November and takes over as Secretary of State. If the supermajority come next winter during the general election or General Assembly changes this and removes this, then it's definitive proof that it had nothing to do with the office itself or protecting anyone, and everything to do with attacking Grimes. And I'm sorry, I think that should be a crime. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, and you're talking about, right, so Secretary of State is a constitutional office.
Correct.
Right, so the responsibilities of that office are constitutional.
Correct.
So if you're going to change the responsibilities of that office, that should be a change to the Constitution.
Correct.
It should have to go through that process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And not only that, when you look at what the responsibilities of that office are, their number one responsibility is as the chief elections officer across the state. So
how absurd is it that they're not on the board?
Right. Well, not only that, but restricted that person's access to the voting records. You have all these Republicans that are talking about purging voter rolls. They can't do that if they don't have access. So you're hamstringing everyone across the board. What purpose does this serve other than to punish Grimes in an election
year
what they're
doing.
In the state? That's absolutely what they're trying to do. And it's ridiculous. But on record right now, I would say the exact same thing if it were Democrats doing this to a Republican.
Yep.
I agree.
I absolutely would. This is just wrong across the board. Okay, moving on. Senate Bill 100, the anti-solar bill. That was just such crap. At the last hour of the last day, when it wasn't an urgency that it be passed, they could have gone back and reworked the bill. Promises were made, deals were made that they would go back and rework it to make it better and more fair. But instead, the coal lobby wins again to take solar down a notch. It's ridiculous.
Yep.
And then
It's sad. It makes me sad.
It makes me sad too, especially because that's where the jobs are. The jobs are in the solar industry. They're not in the coal industry. What are these fools thinking?
Right.
It just makes no sense.
They're thinking they're going to get a donation from the coal industry.
Well, look at the big 5 lobbying groups in Kentucky. There's your answer right there. And the other one that passed, HB 46.
The sigh.
Now requires all public school buildings in Kentucky to have "In God We Trust" displayed prominently somewhere in the building. I'm telling you right now, I'm the superintendent of a school district. Prominently is going to be over a commode somewhere because that's crap.
Yeah.
That's dictating religion in a government building. It should be unconstitutional. I hope that along with the many other ways that our Kentucky State Legislature keeps the ACLU busy and fully funded, that this bill is one that they also tackle, because I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think we'll see. I've got to believe we'll see a legal challenge to that, probably on multiple fronts.
I think we will.
Okay. Anybody have any other big one? There's so much that we really could go on for an hour over all of them. What we can say is that after the veto period, there's 1 day left. Anything can happen in that day. And if you think that any group is sitting around twiddling their thumbs, not planning on being there, you are straight up cuckoo crazy. Because, we all know it doesn't matter if you're an environmental group. It doesn't matter if you're a progressive group. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher support group, if you're for public education, whatever it is, especially if you're a public worker who's concerned about the pension, because we all know what went down last year.
Yep.
We all know that anything crazy can happen on this last day. And it's convenient in a lot of ways, because they've not done this in the last couple years that I've been following as closely as I have, that they did it this way. They took out days at the end. Typically, there's more than 1 day after the veto session, so that the legislators have time to see, do we have the votes to override a certain veto or not, or possibly pass a last-minute piece of legislation. I can't talk.
Legislation.
But
for the masses.
Anything can happen that last day. Like Chris Tobe said, you never know. So everybody is going to be paying attention, whether they're in Frankfort, whether they're watching on KET, listening on the radio. There's going to be a lot of people paying attention that final day, which, depending on what they decide to do, could spark heaven knows what kind of activity,
Yep.
We shall see.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens that last day, and part of it obviously is going to depend on what the governor vetoes and what the governor signs, and that'll obviously prompt some of it. But stay tuned. You definitely want to keep your eyes on Frankfort for that final day, and be aware of what's going on.
I'm sure we'll have some cow patties to pass
Right.
out.
Well, and, like we talk about all the time, and I've said, I don't know how many times over the past couple years, all politics is local. We have people who are so wrapped up in what Trump's doing and everything that's going on at the federal level, but they can't name who their state House representative is. They can't name who their state senator is. They can't tell you, what their county fiscal court does. And we need to stop that. We need to get educated, involved, engaged on every level. And there is no office too small for somebody to run for. I don't care if it's school board. I don't care if it's dog catcher. Do we have elections for those anymore?
We don't.
I don't think so.
But you get my point.
Yep.
There's just too many people that don't know that, and they don't pay attention to that. and they automatically associate what happens on the federal level to what's going on at the state level. So, you know, if they're a Trump supporter, they're going to support any Republican candidate at the state level or the county level or the city level, and not pay attention to, you know, those integral details that matter. Yep. About, you know, are they going to come fix your street that's you've been promised for the last 5 years is going to be taken care of? Trump don't care.
Are they on the board of a corporation?
Right. I mean, Trump doesn't care about that. He doesn't know about that. He can't help you with that. Just like he's not helping our farmers or our workers. Just like we're seeing plant after plant after plant close despite his promises. And that's a story for another episode. But you get my point. We have to be paying attention at every single level. We have to be involved. We have to be engaged. And we have to help spread the word.
Yep. So coming out of the legislative session, we'll be going right into primary season for the constitutional offices here in Kentucky. So there are quite a few candidates running in the primary. And in our next episode, we'll spend a little more time talking about that. We'll be past the General Assembly session. So we'll have a final few thoughts on that, and then we'll talk about what's coming up in the primary and who's running for what. So you can look
Sounds
forward
exciting.
To that.
Yeah, I can't wait.
It's always exciting here in Kentucky. So that's going to wrap up this episode of Left in Kentucky. We thank you for joining us, and make sure to tell your friends to listen to us and check us out. And if you have any comments for us, make sure you leave those in the comments field, no matter how you're listening to our podcast. We appreciate that. We'd love to hear from you. That's it for this week. This is Roberto Henriquez,
Amy Ferguson,
and Dickerson
saying goodbye.
Later.